Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of the Stryd coaching webinar series for 2021. My name is Evan. I am at Stryd, helping with our coaches and athletes. And joining me today is Coach Steve Palladino. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking me on.
Absolutely.
It's great to be on.
Absolutely. We are so excited to start this year, providing more specific coach education and content so coaches can know more about not only using Stryd, how to recommend workouts, but the super critical and important thing of being able to review the data. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today specifically. So webinar subject today that Steve is going to be talking about, and I'll be sort of guiding, moderating, and then asking some of the questions at the end or throughout, is coaching with Stryd. Data analysis and order of operations. So that might seem like a long, drawn out, fancy title, but basically we are going to be talking about the way that a coach looks at and reviews athletes' data. Steve is going to have some great tips and tricks, not to sound too fluff around in trying to draw in around the subject and stuff, but we have some great guidelines and ways that you can look at your athletes' data specifically. And Steve is going to show some great practical examples of that. I would be remiss to say if I didn't start out by talking about the Palladino Power Project. Steve, can you tell us a little bit more about the Palladino Power Project and why some coaches, if they haven't already heard of it, why they might want to check it out?
Well, it's primarily a Facebook group, although we do have a little Strava club going on. But it's primarily a Facebook group where we review athletes' training, race reports, scientific literature, questions, comments, etc. We've got some really knowledgeable people in the power run with power community that contribute, and it's a good place. It's a good place for dialoguing, and the level. I mean, we love neophytes, but the level goes all the way to fairly advanced stuff. So it covers a lot of ground, but I think it's a pretty good group. I really enjoy dialoguing with the people in the group.
Topics today. We have a few things. You'll notice that the word analysis is repeated here a bunch. That is going to be one of the things that we're focusing on. We're going to be talking mainly about reviewing workflow for gathering data into WKO specifically. We're also going to be taking a look at FinalSurge. We're going to be talking about analysis for individual workouts, analysis of testing and reporting back to the athlete, analysis of races and reporting back to the athlete, analysis of training load metrics, analysis of power duration curve and testing decision-making, and tracking KPIs or key performance indicators and metric trends. And I would also say that if you're a new Stryd coach, experienced Stryd coach, we will probably be referencing some terms. So I will make sure to include, a sort of definition sheet at the end too. So if we talk about, LSS or leg spring stiffness, or if we mention, CP, we're referring to, critical power, FTP, functional threshold power. So we'll make sure to put a glossary in there specifically about the terms that we do talk about.
I work from FinalSurge directly to WKO, but there's a lot of different flows that I won't be covering. But as a coach, you might have your athletes on Training Peaks, which automatically syncs to WKO, right, or some other coaching platform. Unfortunately, I won't be able to cover each of those individually, but I'll show, I want to show you what my workflow is, and you can extrapolate that a little bit to your own workflow. And then also, if you look at all these analysis, really the first three are all about analyzing an individual workout race or testing file, an individual file, which will go. But then after I do that, I step back and take the 25,000 foot view and want to look at training load, what's happening with the power duration curve, what's happening with key performance metrics. So it's the the micro view at the individual workout level, then the back it up and let's look at the broader view.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think one thing too, so if, because this is being recorded and sent out, if at any point you feel confused or lost, we're always available to contact as well if you have any questions about this specific webinar as well. And this should be something that even if you don't use WKO specifically, if you don't use FinalSurge, Training Peaks, you have your own flow, this should be able to give you some inspiration and just indication of general best practices in terms of looking at Stryd specific data, power specific data, and also if you find yourself very new to coaching with Stryd, maybe use pace or heart rate or other metrics, the general principles about coaching and reviewing data, I think, should still apply. It's just we'll get sort of in the specifics related to Stryd and power and some other metrics there too. So cool. So coaching with Stryd, the process, this is something that you had sent over, you worked on this slide, and there's a couple different steps here. And I will also say that this is a repetitive and a circular sort of flow. So it's not a to Z or A to B from 1 all the way down to 6, from planning all the way down to feedback. It's circular. So can you talk us through a little bit about the logic and just how coaches might be able to identify and sort of understand this sort of flow in terms of coaching with Stryd?
Yeah, like you said, it's circular, and we'll start with planning and work our way down. We'll prescribe off of what we planned. The athlete executes it. Then we gather the data and whatever workflows you have for gathering the data. You analyze it as we went through in the previous slide, all those different analytics, and then provide the athlete feedback. It could be micro feedback in terms of hey, you might want to tweak this in your workout the next time we do something like this, or hey, your key KPIs are really progressing well. There's different levels of feedback, but after going through that process, you return back to planning again. And it becomes this circular process. And if you stay consistent, it becomes sort of a helical process. Your FTP and your fitness is growing, but you're just following this process here.
Exactly. And then I would also like to point out too, because I think we'll talk about the specifics here, but usually, for general runners or sometimes coaches as well, there's a lot of focus on the specific hard efforts. So maybe 2 to 3 times per week, there's some key sessions that you put a lot of thought into, and the sort of filler, the recovery or the, off days that aren't, what we think of as positively contributing to fitness or adaptations and stuff. It might be logical to apply just this process to just those key days, but I would pose the question to you, is this applicable for every single day or every single run out of a runner schedule that a coach is prescribing to an athlete?
It's applicable to every single run. Now, what you're looking for in each of those may change. How you analyze it may change. The time that you spend on it may change. I mean, I'll sometimes spend, an hour doing, post-race analysis. But for a easy aerobic run, it's checking a few important features and then moving on. So yes, you're applying it to everything. The analytics are applied to everything, but what you're looking at, how much you emphasize it, and how much time you spend on it changes.
Fantastic. So you highlighted these 3 specifically. So data processing, analysis, and remember on the previous slide, we had marked analysis for a lot of different things, and then feedback. Can you tell us the sort of distinction here? Because planning prescription and execution. For some of the Stryd webinars specifically, we talk about there's a before, during, and after. So for a general Stryd user that doesn't have a coach, some specific strategies you can use in terms of like a training plan or planning a workout. Executing feels like the most amount of time that somebody that's just a general Stryd user will spend. So the time that they're actually running, making sure that they're executing that workout properly. And then planning, this is definitely different for every individual, but for coaches, there's a lot of review and then that planning again too. So can you talk more about the specific areas highlighted here, this data processing, analysis, and feedback, and why they should be highlighted here on this slide?
Well, I mean, this is defining the scope of this particular webinar. I've talked to Evan about the coaches webinar program, and I know that he's going to get into those the first 2 or 3 with other coaches, so you're getting a real good variety in both depth and breadth on those subjects. But for the scope of this webinar, it's these latter 3. And you mentioned before, during, and after. Really, the first 2 are the before. There's during is the third bullet, and then the last 3 are the after. And that's what we're really going to be talking about in this webinar, is these latter 3.
Yeah, fantastic. So talking a little bit more about that, again, coaching will start the process. We talk about data processing, individual file analysis and feedback. We're going to take a look at workouts. So the distinction between easy aerobic, intervals, long run, testing, and races. And there is, I think, a lot of importance in terms of like using Stryd to the full advantage, specifically about testing and being comfortable with testing, especially coaches that might be coming from more of a traditional background with a lack of implementation of testing specifically. And then we'll also talk about training load analysis again related to the power duration curve, and tracking KPIs and metric trends. So this is going to be the bulk of stuff, but these are going to be the specific topics that we can reference in terms of looking at WKO or FinalSurge and just some of that general workflow again. So I think you have a screen to share, and then we can take a look at some of these specifically more in depth as well.
Sure thing. And just before going into my screen sharing, I'm going to go into testing analysis briefly, because that could be a whole webinar of its own. All of these elements involve a planning, an analysis, and feedback, and then you change your planning again, like we had on the previous slide. Testing, I may give you a little bit about planning, but this is a whole webinar in itself.
Yeah.
Race analysis, I will go over at least one race and give you that, but I'm going to be doing more of an overview of this. And then on these last 3 here, I put them more in order of importance to me when I'm looking at that 25,000 foot level, the forest view as opposed to the tree view. And so I put them in this order, and so I will spend a little bit more time commensurate with the relative importance in my mind. By the way, I sent an email out to all my athletes to get permission, so their names were visible. So they gave me permission. Thanks to them for allowing me to use their name. So here's what I do on at least once a week, if not a couple times during the week basis. I will go in on FinalSurge, and I'm going to look at, first of all, comments. The athlete will comment. In this case, it's a missed workout, mainly because it's family. Life happens, and there's family commitments and time commitment. So I look at that, and the athlete had an explanation, and it's clear I understood it, and that's great. So I will look at the comments and so forth that the athlete writes, but I'm also downloading. So I'll go in, and this is a little bit tedious process for me with my workflows. I'll go in and I'll download to his file on my computer. I'll download the fit file. I say it's a little bit tedious because I have to download each one, and there's things that allow me to streamline it here in FinalSurge. Once I've downloaded that one, I could skip to the next workout, so on, and download the next one. Then what I'll do, and I'll show this to you in just a moment, is I will go ahead after downloading these workouts. I will go to my files on my computer, and I will drag all of those fit files for this athlete into their WKO. I'll show that in a second. No, so if a coach is on Training Peaks and their athletes are on Training Peaks, then this sync process to WKO is streamlined. It cuts out a lot of time. I go through FinalSurge because it's no cost to the athletes, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to do it this way, where I'm going through, downloading the workouts, and I'll check comments. Today's very hard, and pushed and had to modify a few aspects of the workout. So I want to know that, and I also look at these various feedback icons that are here. How do they feel, and how would they rate the effort level? So this is a pretty much of a max workout for this athlete here, and this one over here was a 9 out of 10. So it was pretty hard week of training. If I'm seeing things here where I'm going, well, that shouldn't be that hard, then I want to dig deeper. Is the athlete getting sleep? Are they doing other things? Or is there weight training or other supplemental training carrying over? Is there residual fatigue that's making this workout seem harder than it should be? Or, are the temperatures higher, et cetera, et cetera? So I look for mismatches between what my expectations were and what the athlete reports. So in this case, I expected this one to be close to max. I was working with a different intensity prescription scheme for this athlete. So yes, I expected this one to be a max type of effort. So I will go through this download process a couple times a week, and again, download the things I'm doing, downloading the data file to fit file onto my computer, where I then will drag it and drop it into WKO, and I'm reviewing this feedback information, which is very important. I'm looking.
One question that I have initially here too. So obviously, again, this is FinalSurge. If people aren't familiar with it, this is the beta layout, I believe, right? So you normally get dropped into a different looking calendar, but you can toggle on this beta view, which I think is very, very helpful. I like if I have given training to anybody in the past, I personally have used FinalSurge, or I've used Training Peaks as well. So one sort of question that comes to my mind too, because it looks like this athlete specifically in 3 days has given 4 pieces of feedback. So like the comment little icon that pops up there. You can click on that very easily, or it appears in the workout. For coaches that, and this is a just sort of general philosophy question, maybe, do you go out of your way to prompt athletes when you start working with them to get in a routine in terms of their flow after a workout? Because obviously it looks like this is a lot of really good feedback from the athlete, and it's something that coaches ask for a lot, is for athletes to be very vocal and be very responsive. So is this something that you build sort of into your rapport with an athlete when you start working with them? Is this something you have to build up over time? Is it something you specifically request? Like, some athletes might be a little bit more radio silent. Some athletes are, very good at sharing literally everything going on in their life. What are your sort of thoughts on prompting that, text feedback from athletes?
That's a great question, Evan. I am now, when I onboard a new client, new athlete, I give them sort of a little instruction sheet on feedback through FinalSurge, and the things that I usually will tell them is, I'm going to scroll through here. I tell them, in the comment section of FinalSurge, go ahead and add, I had to stop for 3 minutes because of traffic, or I had to stop for a bathroom break between interval number 3 and 4, or, this was way too hard, or this was a piece of cake, I sailed through this. I want that. That's great information. And as you suggested, some athletes are liberal with the information they provide, which is great. And if it's too much, I don't care. If it's too much, I'll filter through it. But there's other athletes that it's maybe once a week, and so I'll pry that out. I put comments in, so I could come over here and open it up for myself, and I could put down, tell me how your hamstring felt on this particular day, if I know the athlete's been dealing with a hamstring. There's other aspects that I tell the athlete to use in FinalSurge, which helps, again, the communication. I'm just going to slight tangent here. Notice there's post-workout notes and there's comments.
Yeah.
Post-work, some athletes they'll put their notes or their comments in here, but the problem is post-workout notes doesn't show as a flag up here.
I see.
So they're buried, and I could just look across. Oh yeah, let me check this. Let me check that. Right. Let me check that. Where if they put it in post-workout notes, it's buried. I have to actually open it up. It doesn't show as a flag. So I tell my athletes, put everything in the comment section. Mm-hmm. Now FinalSurge also has this pain and injury report, and I ask athletes to use that if they have a little niggle. The good thing about it is it has a anatomic thing where you can click on where the location is, and has some other good questions. Did it increase through the workout, decrease the workout, et cetera, et cetera. So I asked them to fill that up.
This is on the client side.
Sorry?
Is that correct? This is on like the client side. I think the athlete specifically gets like a different view, like in their mobile app or something like that, where they can write.
Exactly. There is a feel and effort level icon that they can click on their side, and it pops up like so. So I could see, and of course I could, if I were to open this workout to analyze, I could actually expand these things a little bit, and I could see their icons and such here. All right. So
Do you ever take a look at, so you mentioned your flow typically is do a review basically in FinalSurge first. I believe you'll get as a coach, you can have notifications set. So when an athlete uploads a new workout, it can let you know via email or like a notification on your phone and stuff. So if you come in, you have your normal flow. Do you ever look at stuff in the FinalSurge thing too, just to give things a general sort of view? Because I know they have a lap table in there based on the laps or the splits that people have taken on their watch, or they have the graph. Or do you prefer to do your workflow specifically in WKO with the charts that you have there?
Yeah, the latter. I have to open that part up to download it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to open the broader view to download it, where I can look at laps here and data here. I can look at the map, but no, I actually I'll take a cursory glance at it, but really the workflow is, let's get this data over to WKO where I can really start doing crunching with that data. That said, I mean, a coach may just work off of this particular set of analytics. There's other in FinalSurge. There you can also look at an athlete's broader picture, their training intensity distribution. There's other charts that you can evaluate, and I'll do that once in a while. But most of the stuff I do is in WKO.
Sure, fantastic. I think this has been a very good sort of like initial look at how you typically will get that athlete's data. Do we want to move to look at importing, or like if you already have the data in WKO for what that looks like and how your workflow looks like there?
So what I do here, which I'm not going to demonstrate because it requires clicking more screens and so forth. I'll drag those files from my computer set of files for that athlete. I'll drag those fit files. I'll just drag them over to WKO and drop them, and they will load to this particular athlete. So then what I do is at WKO, just to give the viewers sort of a layout. WKO has the what I call the athlete view, which is the big picture, and it has a workout level. And it's just a matter of toggling this particular screen, this particular button on the left here. It also, just to give them a review of it, it has the athlete's current power max, their calculated VO2 max, which I don't use at all, their time to exhaustion at FTP, what their FRC is, which is W prime or reserve work capacity, their modeled FTP, which is like auto CP, and stamina is sort of a tool, a metric that gives you their fatigue when they go to the right of FTP on their power duration curve, and then some other basic metrics here, their training load metrics and their weight. You can toggle between metric. You can see it just turned to 83 kilograms, or imperial units, and I am accustomed to the imperial units, but sometimes I'll toggle right back and forth. So after I've dropped that in, the other thing that I'll do, which does not need to be done if you are a Training Peaks coach and using WKO, the titles of the workouts, the workout details, that gets transferred over, those titles, those descriptions. I copy and paste it. I just, and I'm not going to do it here, But
Sure.
I go back to FinalSurge, and I just copy the workout title, and I paste it right over here on the details, which shows up right here.
Mm-hmm.
So here is what I just did for this particular athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the two workouts that I downloaded just before we started the webinar. And let's go into the next step. So I've downloaded it. I've got it into WKO. Now I'm going to look at each of these individual workouts. I'll make sure that the title is correct. And if there's additional details that need to be applied, like the 2 sets, or this was done at XYZ altitude, I'll write my own little comments in here, and I also will on key comments that the athletes make, I will copy and paste that also in here. So as I'm there's times when I'm reviewing planning for races, I may want to look and say, okay, what was the athlete feeling on this particular day? I'll copy and paste those things in here, the key ones that the athlete's writing in. So I'll filter those and then just copy paste them in. So let's look at my steps.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this athlete here, all the laps get transcribed. It's because it's coming from their watch. These are all the data channels, so I could, if I want, I could investigate which data channels came through, which also gives me a clue as to the data flow, as you know. So I'll check that on this screen here. There's other information, like what their training stress score happened to have been, and how many kilojoules, or their distance. Again, this will talk. If I toggle back to metric, it'll change all of those things. I'll go, since this athlete already has laps, I'll generally just use those laps.
Mm-hmm.
There are exceptions, so I'll go into those in a second. So in this case, I'm looking. Notice that there's this part over here on the right, which is all stuff after the key workout was done. I'll just get rid of those laps. It doesn't get rid of the data, but it gets rid of those particular laps.
Right.
Let me give you another example. So if I click on lap 1, notice it highlighted all this warm up stuff. I'll just get rid of those to just tidy things up. And here's the end of the workout, which I'm also gonna. It doesn't get rid of that data. See, the data's still there, but it just makes it. Now I have only this many. So let's go back to this workout here, which he rated a 10 out of 10. So here's in this particular dashboard, I'm looking at. Okay, I'm identifying the intervals. Mm-hmm. There's also a screen here which overlaps them. I'm not going to go there right now. And then I look at a report. All right. So this I put in my reports. I have this, what their TSB is on the day, what their ramp rate, and so he's missed a few workouts because of family issues and other things. So his TSB is a little bit higher, ramp rate is a little bit low. I do know that he's going to be going into a more sizable build coming up in the next couple of weeks, so this doesn't bother me at all. But it gives me, by having it here, it gives me a reference. If I saw TSB minus 25 and he's saying this is a 10 out of 10 and it's supposed to be an easy workout, it's starting to explain things. Sure. Yeah, he's a little bit tired for sure. So I'll look at the workouts. Now notice if I toggle back to the entire workout, it's just giving me the entire workout data piece. If I come here and I am control clicking, oops, let me get rid of those, and control clicking all of those, then it's going to now give me all of the 4 interval segments. So in the summary.
Maybe I want to ask a quick question here too. So for people, I know, when we initially launched the Stryd coaching site Refresh, a lot of people posted, that they use Training Peaks, FinalSurge, Stryd Power Center. They view data in there, and the next most popular platform is WKO. So a lot of people are familiar with WKO, but a lot of people also aren't. The sort of layout here, can you tell us just about the concept of what you see here? Because like if you just get initially dropped into WKO, like let's say you download it, get the license for it, you don't necessarily have all of these charts that you're showing, and you don't have all of this set up. And so is this specific type of workflow something that you found has worked best for reviewing the athlete's data over time, just having like a run summary dashboard like this, and then you have obviously some other charts that are there to be selected? But can you tell us the logic behind viewing the data here in WKO, and like what the benefit of having some charts like this and being able to view that data in that way might be, or just some reasons why you prefer looking at it that way?
Yes, that's a great question, and so I've already gone over these parts here, but let me just step back. WKO has views, and you can see I can select different views. This is whiteboard, which is sort of my whiteboard is sort of my working area where I create new charts and work on new concepts and so forth. But I have these views which then contain dashboards, which contain charts and reports. So it's sort of like a tree where we have, this is the view for looking at the athlete view, everything you want to look at. And then I have a training load dashboard, a power duration dashboard, other and others. So it's sort of a collection of charts is a dashboard, and a collection of dashboards is a view. I have these, and I've shared these. So when you come to WKO is going to come to some default view with some default dashboards and default charts. I construct things based on my thought process, my review process, which I'm going over in this webinar. And I have it at the workout level, which is the general athlete view, or the athlete level, which is this one, general athlete view. And also at the workout level, I've got a general run workout view. Now, these views that I have, which contain the dashboards, which contain the charts, I'm in the process of updating it. So as I go through this, I'm going to jump over to my whiteboard and show a few other charts that I'm starting to put together to add to the view, so it sort of completes the whole picture. So I'm updating this and changing a few things around, and I'll share those with everybody. And if I don't know, they may even become default views within WKO. So what I have here in this particular workout view is I have this segment selection dashboard, which allows me to select a segment. Let me demonstrate. Let's say we have all the laps. I don't need to re-lap it, but let's say I want to look at the normalized power for this whole interval session. So notice how I'm selecting that. I'm going to come over here. I could zoom on that right now, and if I want to trim it, I could trim it down a little bit more. But let's say I'm happy with that. I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that selection. I'm going to call call that entire session. I could call it whatever I want. That's the entire session, as opposed to the entire workout. Then I could come back here, click on that, and it will highlight that, and all of the summary data in the report is going to be for that particular session. So it's a summary of that whole session. So the average power of that entire session was 272 watts, and that's 85% of this athlete's of their FTP. And I'm going to scroll down here, just the normalized power, which is sort of like a rolling, exponentially weighted rolling average of power, is 300 watts for this session, where the average power was 272. So I could also get the percent of that MP represents. So it's the training effect of the whole session that I would be looking at by looking at that normalized power. Anyway, that's what this particular dashboard is for selecting things, for fine-tooth selecting things that aren't already present in laps. I'll use this a lot in racing too. Let's say I want to look at the first half versus the second half. I want to actually look at the summary data. I'll select things and fine-tooth comb it. The athlete may not have press their lap button, but I can do that on my side in this particular dashboard here. Then this is my go-to. This is where I spend most of my time doing the analysis. And then I'm going to get into this in a second, and I'll go over some of the things I use out of this one. This particular dashboard is for fixing data spikes. Doesn't happen that often. Data spikes don't happen with Stryd very often. I mean, if your wind port gets plugged with water or something like that, it might spike for a little bit. I could fix that, so it's not creating a error on the power duration curve. There may be in some watches the communication may occasionally drop out for a second. I could come in and fill those in. So I use this particular dashboard for repairing files that need just a little bit of touch up. That doesn't happen very often. So let's go back to this workout, and I'm going to go through this dashboard a little bit more. Again, I'm going to reselect the individual interval segments. And you can see over here, the prescribed power range was 326 to 333 watts with 2-minute and 30-second recovery. He had mentioned that he added a little bit of time, and he did between interval 3 and interval 4, he stretched it out just a little bit, another 29 seconds, which is fine by me. And let's look at the execution. So that's one of the first things I look at. How was it executed versus prescription? 326 to 333 watts. He started at 328, progressed very nicely from nearer the bottom to the top of the range. That's what I usually advise my athletes. And you'll see an athlete start at the very top of the range because, oh yeah, I'm gonna hit the top of this range, and then you see them fade. No, we don't want that. I'd rather anything in that target is going to give you the same stimulus. Going 1% higher is not going to necessarily give you this profoundly different stimulus, right? So I tell athletes, look, if I see a top to bottom execution, like they're executing up at 334 and then faded to maybe 326, right? Yeah. Then I put that in my comments. I go, hey, right on, you got the stimulus, but next time, let's try going from bottom to top. You're going to feel better. You're not going to fade, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit better way of executing.
And that's something you can see if you scroll up a little bit, I believe, right in the graphical representation of the charts.
Oh.
You can see that as well. So they provide the visual as well as the like the numbers. I believe that there's the 2 dotted lines. Are those the bounds that you set for the athletes, and you can kind of see that play in between those specific prescribed ranges as well? Is that correct?
Well, those are actually markers that I have in the chart. Here's one thing you can do in WKL. I'm going to expand this chart up a little bit, which I just did. And so what I have is I have a line that marks approximately their power at VO2 max, and that's fixed in the chart. And then I have whatever their FTP setting is here, and then I also put in 80%, which I use this when I'm eyeballing easy days. So I'm looking at this, and that gives me just an eyeball where this athlete is executing this workout. They're like, for example, in this one, they're executing it, with the normal variances in power that everybody that uses power knows about, how stochastic it is. In generally, it's in this particular range. So let me get back to the original. If I wanted to look at one particular interval, if I want to focus down on it, that's what this is. Now that's interval number 4 focused in, and now I could see, where they were, how they executed it in a little bit more fine-tooth comb fashion. I'll use this more for races and stuff than I will for workouts. Okay, let's get back to those. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm looking at execution relative to prescription, as I mentioned. That's important. And then I'll start scrolling through and looking for other metric tells about the workout. So I'm looking at this, and normally I prescribe 6-minute intervals at roughly 100 to 102% of FTP or CP for most intervals. In my training plans, that's the default, 100 to 102%. But as I mentioned earlier, I was working on a different prescription paradigm for this athlete. He's got a little bit higher reserve work capacity, and so I was working on a little bit different paradigm and allowing him, or prescribing for him, higher interval targets than what I usually write. And so that's why this was a 10 out of 10, is because I was getting, pushing him to his max on this workout, as opposed to 100 to 102. He would have probably put that, somewhere around 7 or 8. Right. But, so this just confirms what my prescription plan was. I'm looking at the time of each interval. I have this set up so I can see both in terms of miles and kilometers, their pace in minutes per mile, kilometers per mile. I'll look at, in a workout, in an interval workout, I use running effectiveness as a sort of a fatigue measure. If running effectiveness is declining, that is a potential indicator of fatigue. But as you know, running effectiveness can be impacted by grade and by wind. So I have these other ways of okay, am I comparing apples to apples from the beginning to the end? And you can see in terms of the air power, the wind effect is about the same. And this one here had a little bit more grade to it, so that would explain the drop here. But otherwise, they're all pretty tight. So yeah, I'm looking at running effectiveness here, and it was not declining, so that's a good indicator. Even though he went to 10 on perceived exertion, he wasn't really fading that way.
Right.
I use these other metrics here in the same sort of fashion. Horizontal power ratio, which is the converse to form power ratio, or the inverse. So form power ratio is 25%. Horizontal power ratio is 75%, right? I use this as opposed to form power ratio because bigger is better. Big. I like my brain. That's one of the reasons I use running effectiveness as opposed to eCore. It's the same. They use the same data. eCore is power over speed, and running effectiveness is speed over power. Running effectiveness, bigger is better. Bigger the number, better, right? And I like to look at horizontal power ratio in the same way. Bigger is better.
Do you think, I just want to pop in really quick and talk about the horizontal power ratio. Do you think that, so this is obviously something that is in WKO if you set up your chart. For right now in Power Center, like Steve mentioned, the horizontal power ratio would be the inverse of form power ratio, and form power ratio and form power is something you can see on the Stryd side. Does it make sense to think of horizontal power ratio as being a little bit more important when talking about running speed? So form power is that part of the power that's broken out, that's not necessarily the power that's used to generate you or the power being generated to move forward, whereas horizontal power is more tied in with speed and as you're progressing through your 3D space. Is that a way to think of it, or what is the reason you key off of, besides, I guess, just bigger is better? Is it more important for somebody to understand that horizontal power ratio has a little bit more to do with speed and as you move forward as you're running?
Well, they're both form power ratio and horizontal power ratio are going to respond, are going to be impacted by speed, as you're suggesting. So if you're running an easy pace, easy aerobic run, your horizontal power ratio is going to be lower than if you're doing a 400 meter, at mile race pace, or 1500 meter race pace, or race power, I should say. It will be much higher. So it's important for the coach to think of it this way. Horizontal power ratio is how much power is being used, the ratio of power being used to move the athlete forward. And so the higher, the better, right? Form power ratio, they just have to, it's just a matter of setting your thinking. Form power is the up and down and side to side movement, not moving you forward. So we want to see less of that as a ratio to the total power. So we want to see form power ratio get lower over time or with speed. There's different ways of looking at it. Horizontal power, it's the opposite. We want to see that get bigger. But really, we're looking at the same exact thing in two different ways. So it's here it's set up by the way my brain thinks. Bigger is better. So I'm looking here again, the same sort of thing. If it's dropping off, that's an indicator of the athlete slowing up and fatiguing. Leg spring stiffness, LSS per kilogram. I have my mind wrapped around the per kilogram because I'm looking at multiple athletes, and I like to think of things in terms of how relative is that to my other athletes or to a population norm. I just had the raw leg spring stiffness data, then I'd have to, sort of, okay, how big is this athlete compared to this other athlete who's only 5 foot tall? So I put it, I have it here, and it usually is pretty stable. It's usually pretty stable across grade, and it may vary a little bit by speed. So it's not a big thing, but I look at leg spring stiffness per kilogram, and when I start consistently seeing an athlete down there, the 1.12, or I'm sorry, the 0.12, 0.13, I might say, hey, let's start talking about plyometrics a little bit. So I just, it's just something I put in the back of my head as, hey, do we want to intervene with that or not? Ground contact time is a good fatigue indicator. So if I saw this ground contact time in milliseconds going up, that would tell me, okay, the athlete's fatiguing through this workout. But no. But also keep in mind, like horizontal power ratio, ground contact time, if the athlete's running faster, it's going to get a little bit quicker. So you got to sort of interpret everything with what's going on with these other metrics. That's a very important coaching consideration. Is you want to try not to analyze one metric in isolation. Things are interdependent. You want to keep in mind how other metrics might affect this particular metric. Power to ground contact time is another good way of determining fatigue over the workout. If it's declining, that means they're spending more time on the ground, producing less power. That's not a good thing in a workout or a race and so forth. So I use this for analyzing fatigue. Same thing with stride rate. Stride rate I also use like leg spring stiffness per kilogram. I'll make a note in the back of my mind. Okay, this athlete is tall, so they should be a little bit lower than a shorter athlete. But I may, hey, this is getting way too low, and maybe we'll do a little bit of work on cadence and ground contact time. I usually will try to intervene with multiple metrics rather than just one particular metric. Here's the next thing. A very important thing for coaches to analyze is the person has a pod with air power. We want to make sure that air power is being reported. And there's for various reasons with shoe interactions or what have you, or not putting it on properly, air power may be affected. So you're looking and you go, wow, why were they not hitting not this particular athlete, but why were they not hitting their targets? Or why were they low? Well, you come down here and say, because there is no air power. Or you might go, they hit their targets, but they're saying it was really hard. And you go, wait a minute, air power was low. So if they're hitting their targets that I gave to them expecting air power to be reported. So, it's important to look at that as you start comparing things over time, and you see athletes, like in the Facebook group, you'll see athletes go, why was my speed so much better for this workout than that other workout? And you look at it and there's a difference in air power. Having spent that much time going over all these metrics, I've got many more that I rarely look at, but there are times when I want to. I go, wait a minute, let's do a little deeper dive on that. What's going on there? I've got them built into this, so I can look at other things. But those are the key ones that I look at in a workout.
And would you say that, having WKO built out like this gives you a little bit more freedom and like creativity to create a chart like this? So in the case that, you have a sort of consideration that comes up, once every 2 weeks, like a situation where you want to compare some certain metrics, but it's not a daily, again, we talk about like the order of operations, the way that you look at athletes' data normally, having a chart built out like this and giving you that customization and that flexibility, this just works into your workflow for sort of any consideration. So instead of, using one chart for 80% of your analytics, you have, this chart that has a bunch of different considerations. Would you say that that's something that you've built in here over time, is just adding these different functions and equations to let you sort of analyze any different situation that pops up?
Yep. It's sort of like, you come up with a scenario and go, oh, geez, I need to add that. And on the converse of that is, there's times when there's metrics down here that I haven't used in a couple of years where I go, hey, let's look at that, and then I build it, and then I go, yeah, I'm not using that much. So yeah, that's why I revise these periodically, is get rid of separate the wheat from the chaff sort of thing.
Sure.
So I'm gonna progress to the next level of analyzing this particular workout. So I could come over here, go back to the entire workout. I'm going to switch dashboards. I'm going to look at this particular dashboard, which it does dynamic modeling of VO2 and the reserve work capacity, which in WKO is FRC. And I've done videos on that. I'm not going to go in depth on this. I have videos on my video channel that go over these. But so I will look at this for virtually every interval workout. Now, the blue, just for the people who are seeing this for the first time, the blue is the VO2 modeling relative to their power at VO2 max, which is this center line, which is 100%. The green is FRC, or the reserve work capacity. You dig into your reserve work capacity whenever you go over your CP or FTP. So you'll see it start to drop. And technically, if it drops to 0, you're done. You're going to have to slow down dramatically or stop to recover or regenerate that reserve work capacity, so you could dig into the well a little bit or go back into the well. So I use a lot of different analogies. Going to the well, that's going to the well. Going over red line, that's another concept that runners talk about a lot. And that's what FRC is basically depicting. 0, I've made this chart so 100% VO2 max and 0 kilojoules of FRC left coincide in this horizontal. It's artificial, mainly there for my viewing. It makes it easier to view. Seeing this one go down from the top to the middle, and this one going up from the bottom to the middle. So I'll look at this and I'll go, okay, where did this lie? Oh, by the way, the yellow, the yellowish color is the exponentially weighted moving average of power, and the actual power is these little thin black lines, as you recall from how they're very stochastic. The exponentially weighted moving average of power is a better way of looking at power for the purposes of VO2 modeling. So I have both of them depicted here. So I could look at this chart, and I'm looking to see, okay, what did I accomplish? How much time did they spend over 95% of VO2 max, or at 95% of VO2 max? To me, that's a key number right there. Getting to 100% of VO2 max, you're going to want in some workouts, but like a shorter interval, higher intensity workout, that might be the goal. But for workouts that are done in that just over FTP, the zone 3, zone 4 area, upper zone 3, lower zone 4, you're not going to necessarily get up to 100%. You're just, getting, you're getting over 90%, and you hopefully get some over 95%. So I probably will add an efficiency rating here too. So if the total session, we know is 4 times 6 minutes plus 3 times 230 or 3 minutes. Let's just use 3 as for mathematics here. So we have 36 minutes is the session duration. 32 minutes actually, if I look at it this way from what I created earlier. So this athlete had 7 of 32 minutes spent at 95% or more of VO2 max. So what I'll do after looking at those 2 elements is I will provide feedback. So what I do is I highlight those. I usually will copy all the way down to here. I'll copy that, and then I'll paste it into the comment section of FinalSurge, and then put my comments. Hey man, this is awesome execution. This is awesome execution. And oh, by the way, the reason it was a 10 out of 10 is because I was pushing the prescription on you, and you did a great job. I mean, the execution was beautiful. The fatigue metrics were just not telling that you're folding on this workout. Everything looks good. So I copy paste, and then I also will come back here, and I usually will copy paste this little box right here, down here, just to give them an overview of what they accomplished in the workout. So that's the feedback mechanism on an interval workout.
Yeah, I think this is, I definitely think people watching, if they already aren't experienced with WKO, they probably have some questions too. So I think that specifically about the chart that's on the screen right now, so talking about the VO2 max and the reserve work capacity, again, we'll definitely include the links to the videos that you've done in the past explaining that. But the concepts I think hold, and again, no matter what platform you're using to do your analysis and to do some sort of deep dive. So you mentioned having the flexibility specifically here in WKO lets you look at the things that you deem important, and then you can then use all of that analysis that you've built over time to give feedback to the athlete and then help improve them over time too. So that was, again, just one, using all those core concepts and those kind of tenets of what you were talking about, I think is a great take-home message, that if people are still, kind of maybe wide-eyed over looking at a new platform, if they haven't looked at it before, the key concepts hold to make sure that people understand what it is we're kind of talking about and the specific sort of intentions behind reviewing the data and then being able to pass that on to the athlete and improve your own workflow as well too. So do you have other examples? We talked about different types of workouts. We looked at an interval. We had mentioned looking at easy aerobic or long runs and stuff like that, testing and races as well. So what other types of workflow do you use when you look at these different activity types? I guess would be the next sort of thing.
Okay, well, I think we can go through a few now that we've spent a lot of time on that. We can go through a few others a little bit quicker.
Sure.
So what I did is I just filtered all of his workouts, and I wanted to get to hill sprints, and this is 6 times 15-second hill sprints. Otherwise, he's running easy. So again, I'm looking at this 80% line, and he's generally right around 80% of FTP. But you can see these hill sprints right in here. So to me, in a hill sprint, I don't care what the average power was for 15 seconds. That is not the key in this, because the key is hitting the max, hitting the peak,
right,
on this particular workout. So I in this this same view, I have this other dashboard, and I have this max power report. And so what I have here is, for those 6, I'm looking at peak power and the percent of FTP that peak got to. You can see he was hitting these things. Look at these. They're all 600 plus, and 700. I don't have it in watts per kilogram here, because I'm only analyzing this athlete. I'm not looking at him versus other athletes. So I don't have it in watts per kilogram. I have it in terms of peak power, and this is how I get relativity out of it. With power, it's important. Relativity is very important. We're relating this workout to past workouts, this workout to maybe other people, which needs watts per kilogram, this workout to their FTP. There's all these different levels of relativity, but you want to have that. So I'm looking at this, and relative to his FTP, he was up over 200% on every one of these. So this is what I look for in a workout that's designed to work on that 15 seconds and less, the far left of the power duration curve.
Right.
Let's look at easy. Let's screen for that. Pardon me for that noise. That's WKO. So this is an easy workout, and what I'm doing here is I'm looking at their average power, which shows right here on this screen. I'm looking at their average power and their percent FTP. And that's it. That's what I'm looking at primarily on easy workouts. Why? Because some athletes, I have a few that are pretty notorious, that they'll do their 80%, and all of a sudden 81, 82, 83. Then the feedback is, I'll copy and paste this, and I'll go, the power is supposed to be below this and not more than 80%. You're sneaking up, so be careful. Be careful. I don't want to create fatigue that's going to impair your next workout. So this is my quick check on an easy workout. Are they staying below the target? Now, if this athlete had, let's say, 70%, and it was the day after that 10 out of 10, I go, that's no problem. The prescription is less than or equal to 80%. If he wants to go 65% because that's what easy felt like on that day, fine. They're not going to get any comment from me on that.
Sure.
But if they start sneaking over the target, that will get a comment. The other thing, here's the other thing for the coaches. If you're seeing an athlete consistent at 83%, then you go, is my FTP set properly? Right. Has their fitness increased, that this is feeling really easy to them, and they're getting 83% because the FTP is underestimated or underset? That's something for the coaches to keep in mind. So that doesn't happen that often, but occasionally it does, and I'll go, oh wow, it's time for a CP test, or time for me to test the power duration curve.
Absolutely.
All right, let's look at some long runs and what I look there. So I prescribed a number of different types of long runs for him, but here's one where I prescribed a long run with 2 times 15-minute at half marathon power. You can see, let's just scroll this one. 2 times 15 minutes at 291 to 298. There's the workout. Let me go back, and so I can look at those two, but usually in a long run, I want to see everything. I want to see what the overall workout was plus those sessions. So it comes down to the same thing I was doing with intervals. I'm looking at the same things, but here I'm looking at the overall as well as those particular segments. Let's see. This is another long run that he did. This one here is a long run with 2 sets of 6 times 1 minute at about 5K power. Or basically here, let's run through that first set. So the first set I'll look at, and let's let it do its little. So he was a little bit above 5K power, because 5K power is usually 108, 103. This is 113 is some people's mile and other people's 3,200 or 3,000.
So a little excited at the beginning and at the end of the set, or something that may be something that you could pick out individually for there and say, hey, maybe next time that we do this, remember to back it off a little bit for the first and last, and target the specific sort of targets.
Yep. But I'll tell you, as an aside to the coaches, this is the one time where if someone is going over target, I don't get too excited about it. Because I know they're doing now. If I'm going to come back up here, if I saw that, hey, this set was really bad compared to this set, and they're really fading off here, then I would say, oh, hey, yeah, you overpowered this. But I'm going to let the athlete judge by their perceived exertion how hard they might want to go. I give them the target, but I don't go crazy on them if they're way over target like this. But I do, when I prescribe this higher intensity work, which does give a little bit of VO2 max stimulus, I'll come back and look again here in this workout. He did 2 sets of 6 times 1 in the context of this long run, and he still got 5 minutes of 95% or more. So this is what I'm looking at a long run. In a long run with marathon power tempo or half marathon power tempo, like this, I will look at that like I would in an interval. I would look at those targets. In one like this, where I'm putting in some fartlek, I will look at the actual individual segments and how they responded in terms of VO2 max and so forth in this other dashboard, and I report all that back to them. So we've covered intervals, long run, easy run, hill sprints, and maybe we'll go into race and then testing next.
Yeah, those were the 2 things left under this specific thing for, again, talking about individual file analysis and feedback. So looking at some examples of testing as well as races. And I'm curious if you have some specific charts and dashboards set up. So you mentioned, in some cases, you like to use that segment selection dashboard where you can select the first half versus the last half of the race. So the other pieces here were testing and races, because again, the sort of bulk of a lot of people's training might be those easy days or easy aerobic runs. A long run is something that's usually set maybe once a week. Intervals are pretty standard and common, but one of the differences about training and racing with power is when it actually comes to race day, being able to review, how well you stuck to a planned, wattage range, and then specifically about testing too, checking those max efforts. And then I imagine that testing will relate to the power duration curve subject as we wrap things up toward a little bit after we talk about the testing thing. But yeah, testing and races were the next two things on the schedule.
Coaches, I'm not going to switch screens and so forth, but what I usually do for my athletes is I do the planning process. I do the race power planning, and I give them I send them an email through FinalSurge. Here's a power range. I'll explain how I arrived at it. And based on your running effectiveness might be anywhere from this to this, which with this power range produces these time estimates. So I give them all of that data, and then I say, here's the plan. Let's have you start off at this through through 7K or through 30K or whatever, and then we'll, based on how you feel, you can adjust up to this, but don't go over this. So I'll give them a power targets, and I know Andy Dubois will give even more elaborate based on, downhill, walking, uphill, etc. But for most races, I'll give them a first 2/3 or first half target, and then what to ramp to after that. But I'll send them the email, and then I can go after the race. I can go through, and as I start putting the comments back on the FinalSurge calendar entry, the first thing I'll do is I'll copy the body of the email, and that's the first comment. Okay, so this is what our plan was, and then I start putting in all the analytic pieces, and then start commenting. So let's just, this was Nicole's most recent race, which was January 17th, which was a marathon that she did. So for her, I gave her a approximate target range, and here, actually, let me go to a different one. This is pretty good, but let me also go to okay. So this is one where she ran a PR half marathon, 1:15:28. So that I dumped the data in. She has all of her splits in there, and I'll look at the overall race, right? So I'll start by looking at the race, and sometimes for some athletes there might be a little segment of walking in here while they're standing in the corral and stuff, and then the race starts, and I'll come over to here and I'll trim it, right? Trim to just the race, and then I'll label it as a race. I did not have to do that for this particular one, so I'm not going to demonstrate that particular component. So here is her execution, and you can see that's pretty good.
Pretty flat, pretty darn good, I'd say.
Pretty flat, exactly. The horizontal line, 80%, 100%, and then power VO2 max, and so you can see that she was doing little accelerations in here. It wasn't entirely just iso power, but you can see that she held right a little bit below FTP up to about here at FTP, and then she ramped it the last. If I want to measure that, I just scroll the last about 6 minutes of the race. She was able to ramp. So I'll look at the overall data, and this here was 99% of her old FTP. So that's why it's a little higher. I would expect 97%, for a half marathon from Nicole, maybe 98%. So when I see this, and I haven't changed her FTP setting, that would be, oh, hey, my FTP setting is probably a little bit low. So I'm looking at that. I always look to see what my predicted running effectiveness was and what the actual running effectiveness, which may help explain differences in time outcome versus the power the athlete actually produced. And then I'll just look at this, because when you're looking at a race, it's a golden opportunity to really get a good solid reference point, on a decent course of what these metrics really are for that person. So, horizontal power ratio 80% for a half a marathon for an hour and 15 minutes. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That means only 20% of her power was being expended going up and down and side to side.
Right.
And leg spring stiffness was decent. She will be higher. This could be a shoe issue. Again, you change shoe cushioning, your race shoes versus your training shoes. That'll change that a little bit. So when I see it, and that's a little bit lower than her usual numbers, like 0.160. This could be a shoe issue. So it's not something I'm really worked up about, because I know what her usual is.
Right.
I'll just look at these things.
It seems like that cadence is pretty high up there too. So you mentioned that you like to keep, again, relative sort of considerations, and you mentioned the word relative. So she is not somebody that's over 6 feet tall. So her stride rate at 209, I imagine, is pretty in line with the normal data, or else that would be something that you could pick out from a chart like this, where it's like, hey, maybe we were doing some cadence work, and maybe we were trying some different stuff, and then you can relate that in this chart after a race like this.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly. So the relativity part, she's shorter, and it all, the cadence is going to relate to the height of the athlete, but also how fast they're going. For them, she's going to be a little bit lower on her easy runs and a little bit higher on her faster runs. So I'll look at that. Again, I'm checking to see if air power checks out. And there's many other things, but here's the next one I go to after looking at the overall data. Checking out the overall data, I'll go back to this dashboard, and I'm going to look at this half index report, which basically it takes the selection. We talked about doing selections over here, where I could come in if I want. I could come in here and select, and I could see 6.6. This is at 10.6 kilometers, about halfway. All right, so I could save that if I want to look at the actual average data. So let me do that. Let me save that. I'm going to save that, and I'm just going to call that approximately the first half. All right, not second half, first half. So I'll save that, and now I could look at the data for the first half. If I did that for the second half, then I could actually compare, looking at the actual raw numbers. All right, so for example, if I come over here and all right, we're going to save this as the second half. All right, so now I have first half, second half, and I could actually look at comparing numbers. And I'll do that from time to time. But let's go back to this guy. This does the maths for you. I'm going to go back. This does the maths for you. So what it does is it takes the second half and then divide it by the first half, which gives you the percent change over from first half to second half. So her running effectiveness declined 0.4%. Her power actually increased 0.9%. So what does this mean? This means that maybe the grade increased a little bit, or she hit a little bit more wind, headwind, which causes running effectiveness to decline. But she had a positive power split here. All right. And I can look at other things like power to ground contact ratio in this context is a very telling number. When it's negative, that means that she was fatiguing. Here, she ran this thing and she had her power to ground contact ratio actually improved in the second half. So this race, when we look at the overall, she just nailed this thing, which is probably why she had a PR. So again, in a race, I'm analyzing the overall, and then I'm analyzing the first half versus the second half. In some track races, I might do it by quarter. You know, for example, if it's a 1600, I might do quarter by quarter. Right. Since this was a super race for her, I also did this. I use an expression to search out what was the fastest 10-mile segment of this race. And here it is. And I can look and see that for the fastest 10-mile segment, she ran 57:08, which is pretty close to her PR within the context of the half marathon. So I can do that and look at, some of them are pre-programmed, like for WKO will have the fastest 5K, fastest 10K. I can look at, I could also tell it to just select out that as well. Right. So I'll do all of these little machinations, and each segment that I analyze, I'll copy and paste back in for feedback. And it may be just, pat on the back sort of feedback. So, I'll copy and paste this, put it in Nicole's comments, and some of them may be pat on the back feedback. Others may be, hey, some athletes I may go, hey, look at this. If we change this and opened up with a little bit lower power, you might have, been a little bit closer to ISO power, and you might have got a little bit faster time. In other words, I can give them constructive feedback as well. Right.
And then that's always one of the, I think probably a lot of coaches too, identify that, an athlete will have a performance, they can review a certain amount of data, but then how do you actually use that data to enhance maybe that relationship with that athlete, convince them that, hey, especially if athletes have a negative performance, helping them understand what they can do better for next time and having that specific sort of achievable and like tangible goal. So when we relate that all the way, to power metrics or Stryd metrics or stuff, that's something I feel like can really be a take-home message for a lot of athletes too, and coaches having, that reliability on being able to give that information to the athlete that they can actually understand and help improve too. So being able to reference that specific stuff in the way that you're talking about, being able to give comments and, give a pre-race email or a pre-race text or call or something like that. I feel like that's probably one of the most important things to be able to actually use that data that you have put a lot of work into collecting and doing the analysis on, is being able to relate that to the way that the athlete can take that in a valuable direction too.
Yes. I'm going to give you another quick example of what you just said. This is Nicole's marathon. This is basically solo. She had pacers here and there, but basically it was a solo, like a time trial marathon. And I pre-race, I think I told her she was capable of somewhere between 216 and 221 as her power. And I told her, look, this is solo. It's okay to be conservative on this because you don't know what's going to happen in the solo marathon when you're not racing in the pack. Right. But she didn't hit the 221. She hit 216. She was flat right in here. So it wasn't a matter of fatigue or underperforming. What it told me, I go, okay, Nicole, I think you're actually capable of doing 220 or 221 with if this was Chicago Marathon and you're running in a pack with a bunch of other females that are running, to get in the 237 range.
Sure.
You would have been able to do it. I'm confident. Right. And the other thing, I told her, I said, look, your recovery, because you didn't hit 221, your recovery might be a little quicker because you didn't get to your theoretic max. Sure. You're in this very hard but comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And I go, you may recover a lot quicker. I mean, it was like 2 weeks after she was already starting to hit some pretty impressive stuff in workout. So her recovery has gone much quicker, and she'll be racing again in early March in a real race. So how about we go over testing really quick? I was looking at his power duration curve, and look at how wavy it is. I was going, well, he was really low down in this range, and now look, he's bounced that up, and he raised his 15 minutes up. Now, maybe in the future we test in this range, but I was going, okay, let's look at some segments that we can prescribe, and not only plug into a monod CP calculator, but also it's going to benefit the power duration curve. I'll show the coaches this one here. This is there's a few versions of this in WKO. It's identifying the best times for informal testing, where you should test the power duration curve. And basically, your coaches, without this chart, you can eyeball it. Where does the athlete's mean maximal really deviate dramatically from the model, right? So before this test, the red line is how the percentage of deviation. So in this case, the actual the mean maximal is 13.7% right now, below the model at roughly a minute or so. Before this test, it looked like this. Okay, so this is what I did is essentially created a new range. This is what it looked like before. You can see that out here around 15 minutes he had a little bit, and right here he also was a little bit needed to be tested in here right around 30 seconds. So,
if I can clarify a little bit, this specific chart, the red line is highlighting the biggest difference between the model and then the actual performance, and gives you a little bit of a better visual indicator of where there might be some gaps in the model versus the actual power duration curve.
Bingo. Yes. Okay. Yes. So it also gives you actual numbers if you want to read over here, but it gives you a visual. Sure. Where the deviation. So then it's up to the coach to figure out, okay, how much is that going to leverage the CP? Down in this range, it's going to leverage the CP down a little bit. Up here, it's going to leverage it up. But I wanted to balance that. So I chose that particular range. All right, 30 seconds. And 15 minutes. So let's go back, and this is how it comes. And what I do there, he had all the laps. I do not use laps because there's a little bit of lag.
Right.
So I'll usually come here on the selection dashboard and I will actually select it. 15 minutes. I could keep coming back and doing it, and I could get it down to where I want it, and then I'll save it, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
So here, what I'll do is now I've highlighted the test segments, and here are the averages and the time. I usually will copy that into the comment section. Then I go to the superpower calculator, and I start plugging data in there, and I get a CP estimate. And then I also come back and look at the power duration curve, and I look to see how that may have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will take these various points, these various estimations, and I'll triangulate to my own set FTP,
Mm-hmm.
which bumped up from 308 to 315 with that particular segment. But again, for a test, I'm not going to go too much into planning other than what I already did.
Sure.
That's a whole nother webinar, but I will.
A couple webinars, in fact.
Yes, I'll select the segment, and get the power, plug it into the various calculators, as well as use the model. Okay, questions?
Yeah, so for this specific thing, again, you mentioned the whole nother webinar fact about that. I totally agree. Is there a way, I guess, that you might specifically reflect on testing besides using those charts and figure out, like, if an athlete didn't have a test that was sort of expected, because you mentioned, you can have some specific planning about the tests and administering them and having some goal ideals. Do you give athletes a sort of range that they should be shooting for using some of these calculators or stuff like that? Or do you normally just let them go off of RPE and figure out that way for the I guess testing recommendations when you give it to athletes?
I will look at if they've tested previously at the same durations. I'll look at that,
mm-hmm.
And that's my number one go-to. But then I will also look at the model. So, for example, if I'm testing Guillaume, I'm not going to test you again. But if I'm testing him, I'm going, okay, hey. I can't read this on the bottom. Maybe you could read what the time is.
159.
Okay, so next time might be 2 minutes and another 15, or maybe a 12, because the 2 minutes is pretty hard.
Sure.
30 seconds and 15 minutes is more doable than a 2 and a 15.
Sure.
So I might come in here and test at 2 minutes and 15, or I could say, hey, we need to schedule a 5K or a 5K
right.
time trial as a one-off, right? Not as a CP test, it's just a one-off, or maybe you got a 10K, and we'll just wait. Hopefully that we can hold off for another 5 weeks with our current estimates. But yeah, I'll usually use the model when it's that far under. I'll use the model. Otherwise, I'm giving them their prior targets, and I'm just saying, look, start off here. Let's say it's so 2 minutes. Okay, I might say your last one you did let's say you did 385. All right, let's say that was 6 weeks ago. Why don't you start off at 385 and run the first minute at 385? It
right.
might feel real easy to you, but who cares? You're going to ramp in that next minute. You're going to ramp until you're spent at the end of that 2 minutes, right?
Totally.
So and if they start off at 385 and ramp up, they'll end up maybe 390, which is going to move the model a little bit. So
exactly,
that's what I'll do.
Exactly. So we have 3 quick things I think to touch on before we have the questions that were submitted from the coaches. The first would be training load analysis, and maybe this is just a general conceptual overview of the training load analysis related to power duration curve, and then anything about tracking KPIs and metric trends. So it looks like you do have dashboards and some charts built out here, maybe to give just a general sense of overview and maybe one specific context about Guillaume, who just tested, maybe what kind of catches your eye and your sort of workflow if you're glancing at these training load metrics here in WKO.
Sure thing. So again, going back to the video, the video channel, I did a whole series on these various training load metrics. Mm-hmm. So that if for the coaches, if you're going to the video channel for that VO2 and FRC modeling series, there's also a series on training load metrics. But what I do is after I've gone through workouts, as you see here, for an athlete. So I've downloaded a week's worth of data, looked at their workouts, I've given them their feedback. Now I come back and I'm looking, okay, what did I do? What's happened over this last week? And so I'm looking at their chronic training load and their RSB, what their training load ramp is, their intensity load. Your chronic training load tells you the combination of duration and relative intensity. They're mixed together. So we want to parse out what's happening with the intensity load. And that's what this chart is in the lower left here, where this cursor is. And then there's others. There's ATL to CTL ratio, which you like to stay in that 0.8 to 1.3 as a very productive area, which is sort of like RSB or TSB.
Sure.
And it's sort of like training load. So I'm looking at all those things, all these various things. I can scroll down and look at time in zones in report form as well as graphic form, like so. That's training load metrics. So I want to take a good look at that and make sure that I'm not deviating too much from what's optimal in terms of training. I'm not seeing this ramp load get way high. Then I come back and I'll look at what's happened with the power duration curve this week. So I actually have this chart in here that allows me to look at MMP a week ago versus today. And you can see as I scroll back and forth
there,
just the effects of that test. So I will look at that, and I'll look, has any of the model FTP, the FRC, have these things changed? So I'll look at that, and I might want to look at some KPIs. So let's look at this one here is looking at horizontal power ratio, leg spring stiffness, running effectiveness over the last 90 days. Okay, so I've changed it to 30 days so it doesn't have to load as much data.
Sure.
So what it's doing is allowing me to track that. Now, this one is filtered for 88 to 102% of FTP because these values will change depending on relative intensity. I could also filter for grade. I could even filter it by shoe type. If like Guillaume is starting to give me which shoes he wore for which workout, and I could start filtering what his values were, and then track it over time. So in this case, here's his trend line. His horizontal power ratio has trended up just slightly at this intensity range. His leg spring stiffness has improved considerably, again, filtered within this intensity range. And maybe because of the changes in leg spring stiffness, his running effectiveness has improved. And I can look to see if the slope is positive and how positive it is. there. So yeah, I could actually track KPIs. There's others that I'm developing markers for example, where their current FTP is versus their all-time best, they're close, etc. So those are the things that I will look at after downloading all the individual data, commenting back. I will look at training load, what's happening with their power duration curve, and then I might look at what's happening with some of the KPIs. That then allows me to go back to that planning stage, which we talked about at the outset, and start planning the next week or the next month and so forth. Do we need to back this athlete down? Do we need to ramp this up? Do we need to hit this intensity more than this intensity? So all of that is by looking at this force view, and then I start planning for the next level of prescriptions.
Yeah, this is I think absolutely fantastic, and I think you hit every single piece and gave like a meaningful breakdown where we can definitely create a list out of that, but then be able to show some of the specifics. So I think that is absolutely fantastic. I can add the slides back up here, and then we have a couple questions to go over before wrapping this up, and we appreciate anybody sending in questions. So we'll touch on some of these because, Steve, you did talk about some of these points specifically, but I think it might just be a good reminder to talk about if some of these are a repeat from some of the things we talked about in the webinar. So there are different training sessions that an athlete does. Are the analysis always the same, or do they differ according to training? For example, long run versus interval training, a key unit, which might be a specific preparation phase versus a simple or base running unit. So we did take a look at long run versus easy aerobic run versus interval versus test versus race. And you did have a suite of charts and dashboards that you do use, but then you have specificity when it comes to specific activity types too. Is that the correct way to think about things? Not just use the same data package for everything, but actually break out some of the things depending on the specificity there?
No, actually, I use the same data package. What I'm trying to do is expand the data package so that I can, I don't have to do too many machinations. I just click on another button within that data package to do a different type of analysis.
Sure.
So within that view, that workout view, you saw me switch from looking at the actual workout and individual intervals to the VO2 and FRC. And then I also went to max power report in a different tab. So yeah, I use the same package, but I'm using different components of that package depending on, easy intervals, long run, race, test, etc.
Totally. And then you don't differentiate between a key unit or what might be referred to as like a specific phase of preparation versus a simple or basic phase of preparation. You have the same set of charts and data to view. And then again, you just pick through that depending on how the situation is piling up right then.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Perfect. Next question here is, are there any complementary strength training exercises and drills focused on running that you give athletes? I have some sub-questions here that might guide discussion a little bit. And I know that you have an article about this on your site in a specific case study, I believe, talking about using plyometrics and how those impact some of those advanced metrics.
Yes. So in the Facebook group, Palladino Power Project Facebook group, on the right-hand edge, there's topics or common topics. Click on topics and go to supplemental training. Click that topic, and I think we're up to 7 or 8 different threads that discuss that, including the 2 that you just mentioned. So yes, I do prescribe supplemental training, particularly if the athlete has done them in the past, or if they request them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them already have their program, and in which case I just ask them, hey, describe your program and let me know how much time you're devoting, which days, put that, manually enter that on your calendar so I can know how that's interacting with the stuff that I'm doing.
Totally.
So sometimes I'll prescribe, sometimes I'm just monitoring what the athlete is doing on their own. In terms of frequency, for most runners, doing it a couple times a week after their harder days. I answered a couple questions here. I like doing it after for the most part, although some things are done before. Priming drills, your mobility drills like lunge matrix and hip swing done before. Your form drills and spring drills, your hops and so forth, done before as a priming, a warm up. But then the heavier lifting and even plyometrics can be done afterwards. It's rare, but plyometrics sometimes before as part of the warm up for a sprint session, which is not common in running, in distance running. But when done, the plyometrics can actually be a priming for better sprint performance. But for most runners, I do it after, maybe even a separate session, but it could be immediately after, a couple times a week.
Fantastic. Next one here is, how do you prescribe target power for interval training? So you showed some examples of, again, how you have some stuff in FinalSurge and then you copy and paste the titles there. And I noticed that there were some specific ranges. So some were as small as maybe 7 watts. Like I think one was like 291. It was like 2 times 15 minutes at 291 to 298 watts for a specific athlete, which is around their half marathon tempo, you said. Do you give a target power and then a plus or minus, or do you typically like to give a range? How do you prescribe a target for specific interval training?
I usually prescribe in a range, and it's usually a 2% range. For most athletes, which for a neophyte might be hard to control it within that range, but with experience you get that perceived exertion and your feel for what power is, and it becomes very easy to stay within a 2% range. Now I will expand that range as you get into higher intensities, like you're getting into the zone 5, or you're getting over 106%, say. I might expand that range to a 4% range. And particularly for some of my athletes that I know are capable of going higher, I'll give them the latitude by expanding the range. On the other hand, there may be other athletes where I want to control that they're not going too high, and so I keep it at the 2%. But usually it's 2% ranges, and it's usually, now how to pick the target, it's sort of a whole nother webinar, but let me just briefly say, historically, when you're prescribing intervals, if you're doing it by pace, you're going, hey, I want you to do 5 times 1K at 5K race pace. Or I want you to do 6 times 1 mile at 10K race pace. Well, 5K race power or 10K race power becomes your target. So, for most runners, 10K power is about 100 to 102%. So, 5.5 to 7 minutes at 100 to 102%. There's how you translate. So you go by typical race power historically. Now that said, I'm just going to tickle. You can also go off of your power duration curve, and maybe we'll come back and do a webinar on that in the future.
I can guarantee that is another webinar. So that is something that is on our short list. So people can expect that in the next few months, I would definitely say. And I think that this is one of the last questions. Do you measure strength progress through running power If so, how do you go about it, and what do you look for? I kind of left this purposely vague just from the person that sent it in. So strength progress, some people might have different definitions, just like there might be different definitions for, working definitions for a threshold or a tempo or something like that. But maybe just opening the floor to you to talk about measuring strength progress through running power.
Yeah, so you can't really measure strength in the classic term of strength with power, but let's expand that. I'll go back to the example of the 6 times 15 second hill sprint. What we're looking for, he did a series of, in the 670 to 690 range. Well, over time, if all of a sudden he's doing those things at 700, 710 range, that's progress. Right. You've given him the same workout, but you're doing it a month later after doing a bunch of other things in between, or you've given it to him 2 weeks later, and now their max is just improved. You're looking at, that's why I wanted to look at max power, not average. Sure. Their max just bumped up. There's one way. You might look at just looking at the inner duration at the intervals. Let's say they're doing, this month they're doing 5 times 530 at 100 to 102%, and you progress them just 5 times 6, 5 times 630. Right. That's progress. They've now bumped it up by 5 minutes over a period of a month. Their tolerance at that intensity. So that there's another way. I showed you tracking leg spring stiffness per kilogram, which would respond to plyometric training many times, or strength training. Look at running effectiveness. There's a number of different ways of tracking key performance indicators, whether you're defining them as strength or some other definition, but there's ways of tracking these improvements other than just simply tracking FTP or CP over time.
Absolutely. I think that's, great summary for that. And it looks like that was the last question here. So I want to thank you, Steve, for coming on and talking to us all about coaching with Stryd, order of operations, and data analysis. If people have questions, where can they contact you?
You can certainly ask questions on the Palladino Power Project Facebook page. I also peruse the Stryd Facebook pages, various Stryd Facebook pages. So if you ask a question and you tag me, I'm responding to it. And then I think FinalSurge has a contact mechanism. If you have a FinalSurge, contact the coach. There's a mechanism that way. Sure.
Again, thank you so much. This wraps up the first edition. We look forward to sending this out, and we look forward to continuing this series in 2021. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another webinar. Thank you so much again, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.